We used to be number 10. Now we're permanent at 1. In the battle, lost my finger. Mike became my arm. Pistol nozzle hits your nasal. Blood becomes lukewarm. Tell the woman be easy. Nah, squeeze the charm. Test Wyclef. See death, flesh get scorned. Beat you so bad, make you feel like you ain't want to be born. This week, we're talking about the Fugees, 90s classic. The
That
score.
was ambitious. That was really ambitious. I'm impressed.
That's awesome. You toughed it out.
I did.
Welcome to the Essential Albums Podcast, where three guys from 85 have a conversation about some of the biggest albums ever and forgotten favorites from yesteryear. We'll dig into an album's place in culture, discuss its merits, and decide if a record holds up and it's worth your time. Of course, we get into a lot more than that, so join longtime friends Ryan, Denise, and myself, Gordon, as we dive into our favorite albums and relive some of the classics. I guess we're talking about a classic this week, the second and final album from the Fugees.
The funniest part is, like, every time I practice that beforehand, I never jumbled up any words.
Oh, yeah.
In the shower, you're on point.
Well, no, not that. I was just saying when I was getting ready for the podcast, but whatever.
But of course, yes.
Nice.
It's always when you're on.
So yeah, this is one of the biggest albums of the 90s. So I was pretty young when it came out. I think I was either 10 or 11. So it just, for me, it had a pretty kind of big impact because it was everywhere. It was big in the sense that, like, it was everywhere, but I didn't own this album because my parents would buy it for me because of the language, they thought it was bad. But what was your impression of the score by the Fugees when it came out? How about Ryan?
Mine was mostly like dances at junior high, I think. That's and the radio station. This is like you. I didn't listen to this when it came out. It was more just like, it was it was part of the pop vein, and I was getting into Nirvana. I wasn't about to listen to anything like this at that point.
Right.
Yeah, for me, it was just like, it was sort of just in the zeitgeist. Like, you'd hear the singles on Much Music. Just what Ryan said, I was getting into rock music at the time. It wasn't like I didn't like it. I just wasn't sort of paying attention to it, really. For me, it wasn't until I remember, like, later on getting in, when Wyclef came out, like, not to jump forward, but like that's when I was like, you kind of go back like, oh, he was from the Fugees, and then like Lauryn Hill comes out, I was like, oh, that's that girl from that, and like you start piecing stuff together, and that's how I kind of got into them sort of later on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I first got into Lauryn Hill, and then I put I went back in time. Yeah. So I don't know if it was, maybe it's just our age. I mean, that was probably more high school for us. Miseducation, when did that come out?
Yeah, we would have been like end of junior high.
98.
Yeah.
Okay, so just
going into high school. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I knew who Lauryn Hill was when Miseducation came out because, the videos were so big. Like, she was clearly in them, like for Killing Me Softly and Ready or Not. So I knew who she was. And then Wyclef, he had like such bangers on his album with Carnival, which came out later. So it kind of just worked out in terms of me as a kid absorbing this information.
Yeah, because it was almost like the echo of this. They all became like individually like big because of it. Like, you had the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, Carnival, and then Praz had Ghetto Superstar, which was like a big single with like ODB and Maya. So it was like all three of them were sort of like, they had big solo releases right away.
Did Praz go on to do more stuff?
No, I think he pretty much did that one album, maybe some other singles and maybe an EP or something, but I think it was just really that one album.
Yeah, funny thing, I saw an interview just before we jumped on this, and it was a really interesting interview. But he mentions that like early on, he didn't really pay attention to like the noise of like what was going on in the band and stuff like that, or the group, the drama and stuff like that. He was just focused on making money, and he knew it wasn't going to last forever based on like the volatility of the other members and stuff like that. So he just focused on investing. And if you look at their net worth, like he's worth 20 million, the other two are worth 9. So he just put his head down and focused on his finances. So I thought that was really interesting.
It's funny because it's like, especially Wyclef, like he's still like somewhat relevant, releasing music, working with people. You'd think that he'd be like the most wealthiest. Not that money means everything, but I guess the investing part, if you're investing your money, it's less of a risk than art.
That's
Yes.
true. I mean, plus Lauryn Hill's like she's got another Diamond album as well.
Yeah.
So, so I guess we can ask, what's your current relationship? Or I mean, this band broke up technically in the mid 2000s. So how do you pay attention, or how what's your relationship to the Fugees or the three of them over the years?
They
Denise?
broke up in the mid 2000s.
Well, they
Technically.
got back together for like a small reunion. They did that block party thing for Chappelle and stuff. And I
Right.
think they might have done like a mini tour, but they didn't record anything. So it's more so just like touring stuff, special dates.
Okay. So they just kind of disappeared and then came back to officially break up. Is that what happened?
No, it's
Yes.
just sort of like, I think it was more just like a reunion, no?
Well, I think they got together like for that reunion, and then they started trying to work things out. So there was a single that came out, like "Take It Easy" came out around that time. And then after that, they were like, "Okay, no, we can't work together. This isn't going to work out." And then at that point, I think is when they officially called it and said, "We're no longer we're broken up."
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like Wyclef and Lauryn Hill especially have like visions of what they want.
Yeah, that's the impression I got. Like those two are like leading this charge, and I can see like if they both have, if they
'cause it
can't
makes
collaborate, if they're both like
Yeah.
you know, direct leaders, they don't want to share
Well,
the
when you
throne.
read him like how they all got together, it was I believe it was Proz approached Lauryn Hill because she had some notoriety from being in Sister Act 2. So like, well, hey, want to join the group with me and my cousin? So like even just the beginnings of the group was like, okay. And then pretty much a year after that, they had their first album, and then a couple of years after that was a Score, which it was a surprise the label even made them do it after the first album sort of bombed critically and commercially. So it seemed like they were just together to kind of get a spark, especially like asking Lauryn Hill to join because she had some juice already from the movie.
So
I could be wrong, but that's what it seems like.
Well, then what's all this drama about? Like we talk about like band drama. I don't really know the story, but like on the album, even it seems like Lauryn Hill's kind of rapping about it at certain points. And so I like, what is it? Is they just?
So I mean, yeah, just what I've kind of seen through interviews and stuff like that is essentially, yeah, what Denise was saying, where Proz kind of grabbed Lauryn Hill. They met in high school, but Wyclef Jean is Proz's cousin, so they knew each other, and so that he's kind of like the link between the two of them. So yeah, he said, "I'll take care of like Lauryn Hill." Like he said that to her mom. He's like, "She can come with us. Don't worry, I'll protect her." And then Wyclef Jean's like his brother, right? Like his boy, more or less. And then I guess over time, Clef and Lauryn Hill started to have like a relationship. And Wyclef Jean's he's been married this whole time. Like he was married in 1994, and he's still married to the same woman. So yeah, there's extramarital stuff there. I think at one point Lauryn Hill got pregnant. I don't know if she had the kid or anything. I just kind of heard about that just before we jumped on, which I thought was interesting. So, and then there's other things too, like just working together. I think Lauryn Hill didn't she hasn't even released too much of her own after Miseducation. I know there was like that MTV Unplugged, but a lot of people were kind of divided on that. So she's kind of dealt with her own issues. She put herself in like self-isolation for a while, where she wasn't talking with any media, wasn't watching any TV, anything like that. So I think it's just they're just more or less difficult. Like they don't want to work with each other. Like Proz has said, he's like I've been cool with everyone. Like I still talk to everyone. I can't talk to Lauryn every day, but at the same time, like we're still cool with each other. So I think it's just like they don't want to be around each other for an extended period of time.
There's too much baggage at this point. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's why pretty much for me, like relationship today is the old stuff. Like for me, I listen to just even beyond the Fugees. Like I'll jump back and listen to songs from the Score. I mean, not the whole thing, but I remember a few months ago, I was like, I feel like listening to Ready or Not, and I just threw it on one day. It's the same with like songs from Miseducation and The Carnival. I know they're not Fugees albums, but they're Fugees adjacent. So those three albums, I sort of revisit songs, not all the time, but somewhat often, especially like depending on the vibe. Especially that Carnival album has like a lot of party vibe songs, so it's always good to throw on. But yeah, other than that, it's hard to keep up because no one, other than Wyclef, they don't really release new music. So it's hard to kind of keep up with them.
Yeah.
Right now, for some reason, my nephews love that song Wyclef and Shakira did for the One World Cup, so it's constantly being played. I don't know how they came across it on YouTube, but they
Weird.
constantly want to hear it. So I constantly see Wyclef whenever I'm with my nephew.
Nice. I was actually just watching a Tiny Desk performance. Wyclef was
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah, he did
like-
one of them.
He's like really good. He's playing.
Yeah,
piano.
he's like a good live performer. Like I remember even he was at Woodstock '99 and he like did like a tribute to Hendrix and burned his guitar and stuff. He's quite the showman.
Yeah, and not only that, like one thing that's really impressive is how much he can backphrase, like sort of like rap behind the beat, and just like almost to the point where it sounds like he's falling off, but he's not. He's like relaxed. He's done it so much. Yeah, it just looks like it's totally chill for him, where it kind of feels like at any moment it could fall.
I don't know. He's like one of those rappers who's like he just has so many words and they just never sort of stop. And you're like, was he gonna like take a breath at any point?
So is there like a release, like a final, like have you kept up with Wyclef like up until like as his most recent release, or was there like
really,
in the mid-2000s it might have fallen off?
It's not like I follow him that closely. Sometimes it'll be like sometimes he'll drop a new album. It's like, okay, I'll check it out. I don't know when the last time he dropped an album. I know he did like a Carnival 3 a little while ago. Carnival 2, I remember had some good tracks, but I think he released a single earlier this year. But before that, album-wise, I'm not sure when that came out. 2019, I guess. Wyclef Goes Back to School, Volume 1.
Yeah. For me, other than like, I guess like in regard to Wyclef, I did pay attention to the album, like the Carnival, and I think the album that came out after that, because I remember it had like Perfect Gentleman on it, and I was like, I love this song as a kid.
And then he kind of got like he started working with like The Rock. It's kind of a weird moment there.
Yeah, didn't he do that song with The Rock? Yeah, not
it
rock
doesn't
music,
matter.
like Dwayne Johnson.
Yeah. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
I
and
got
then
50 families in the West Indies.
I think the last track I remember him being on was probably like "Hips Don't Lie" with like Shakira. That wasn't the FIFA one, right?
No, he was like on another one.
Okay, yeah, they had another one. Yeah, so and then "Hips Don't Lie" I read as well. Apparently, it was rework, like it was part of the material of the stuff they did in the mid 2000s as Fugees, and it was originally going to be called "Lips Don't Lie," but then everything fell apart, so he reworked it into the Shakira song for "Hips Don't Lie," which I thought was pretty interesting.
With Shakira, you need to be the hips, not the lips.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I guess we've kind of been talking about it, but Ryan, like, how often is this album in your rotation?
Not really. Like, I've gone back to it a few times, but mostly revisited for the podcast. Actually, like, I really like Miseducation, and that was like my introduction. A friend of mine showed me Lost Ones. I was blown away, and so when I went back initially to back into Lauryn Hill's catalog, I like, where's more of this? Because at this point, I think she'd already done the MTV Unplugged thing, and that was a write-off. I don't know. I can't remember what year that was, but I remember listening to the Fugees and be like, it's just not quite as good. And I kind of like wrote it off. I'm like, okay, I remember these songs from like junior high, and I just didn't listen to it. But getting back into it for the podcast, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. I like a lot of spots of it. So I think I was just taken so much by Miseducation that I wanted more, and obviously that's going back in time. So what do you expect to happen? Although there are some hints, there are some vocal things that she's doing on this album that I guess if I had listened to, like, gave it more of a chance initially, I would have dug into those and noticed those, made those connections. But
Well, one thing I was noticing this week, like with this album, is when you listen to it, I think it goes for both Lauryn Hill and Wyclef. Proza just doesn't have enough work beyond this to like. Ghetto Superstar is okay, but Lauryn Hill and Wyclef, like this album, like it's good, and when you hear it, you can hear that they're both very talented in what they're doing. Lauryn Hill's voice is fantastic. Wyclef has nice flow. He's like, I like the way he mixes in the guitar with like with the songs. He considers himself a guitar player. I love that about him. But when you hear their first solo albums, like when you hear Miseducation and Carnival, those are albums you can tell they kind of put like themselves on, like their whole heart and soul into, as opposed to this is more like the group thing.
A dysfunctional group at that.
So, dysfunctional group is that, because like a lot of the lyrics on here are just like braggadocious were the best rappers. There's like one song about like police brutality, and then there's songs about robbing people and stuff like that. But overall, it's just pretty much braggadocious rap. It's not really the most amount of substance. Whereas when they're going forward, it's Wyclef and Lauren are both elevated, like lyrically. Like it's not just their great voices and great flows; it's the actual content in their lyrics that sort of gets elevated, as well as the music. It seems like they just become better producers and better songwriters overall.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, you do bring up good points there, Whitney, with like talk about the albums that they do after, simply because Wyclef offered to produce Miseducation, but she was like, no, I'm going to do it on my own. And then he's obviously a producer, so he produced his stuff on the own. So it's cool how you can see like Fugees kind of brings how they work together to bring that together, even though it is this, like 2 years prior.
Yeah. Yeah, because like now, if someone was to go back, you have all this different stuff. It's kind of cool to see where everything comes from, because especially that Miseducation album, it's pretty much so many artists today just always listed as an influence. So it's kind of cool to see. I'm sure people want to hear more of her work, and the only thing really that's even close to quality is the score.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yeah, you're kind of limited in terms of Lauryn Hill content, like
which is unfortunate, but kind of adds to her legacy in a way. But I guess we can talk about that at the end.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, you could definitely. There's definitely more on the, at least from what I remember, more on the production side, more elaborate production on Miseducation. So, and this album is very minimalist, like mostly just 3 tracks, like 3 instruments per track or whatever. So,
it's usually just some sample and then a beat and then maybe a little guitar riff or something that Wyclef will add.
Yeah. So if you want Miseducation, you just got to go to Miseducation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is its own thing for sure. So yeah, for me, in terms of how often it's in my rotation, I would say it's probably not in it often enough. I do try to revisit it like every few years. I want to say like every 4 or 5 years. And usually when I do it, it's usually like Fugees and Miseducation for sure. And then I'll throw in Carnival when I can. I haven't listened to that album in a really long time. I should definitely revisit it.
I find all three of those albums, not to just keep relating all 3, but there are those albums that I might not listen to as regularly as some other albums or just other artists. But whenever I do revisit it, it's like, holy shit, this is really good. I should listen to it more. It's like you're rediscovering it every time you put it on.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, so yeah, I guess we can move on to more song-specific questions from this album. So this album had 4 singles. They were Fujila, Killing Me Softly, Ready or Not, and No Woman, No Cry. I didn't even realize No Woman, No Cry was a single, but it was a late single, so I think it was just based off of the success of the album. So I guess we can kick it off by asking, what do you think is the biggest song from this album, Denise?
Well, I Killing Me Softly, I guess. But I remember Ready or just like it's Killing Me Softly was like the biggest one, sold the most, whatever. But I remember also Ready or Not just being played just nonstop back then as well. Like it seemed back then they were both kind of equally as big, but I guess the whole recognition of it being the Roberta Flack cover gives Killing Me Softly that little bit of edge, because I remember my mom even liking it. You know what I mean? So it had that other layer to it, which made it even bigger. So I'd have to say Killing Me Softly, just for the fact that it was able to touch with the younger audience of the time and the older audience, because they were able to be like, oh shit, it's Roberta Flack, but with a
absolutely
new beat.
Yeah, I didn't even realize that till it was a cover till like years later. So what we're seeing here is really neat. It's like the making of a standard. Because I just a couple weeks ago, an older student of mine wanted to learn the song, and they had never heard this version. And this is the version that I know. This is the version I know. And it's pretty interesting version when you put in that context, because they left out the chords for the verses. It's just like a cappella, right? Just the beat and those vocals. But then they saved those chords for the bridge. So like I didn't really realize until later that there was actual chords on. Well, you can hear them in the vocals; they're like implied. But when you hear the original version, you're like, oh, okay, I see how they twisted this thing. Really neat. I love how that can happen to songs. Sucks that maybe the biggest song on the album was a cover, but I still like the making of standards.
Yeah, well, because she just with like how like Lauryn Hill's voice, she just brings so much to it. Just her voice is just so unique, and it's that whole different flavor. It's like it's really an updated version because I don't know, like I wouldn't be throwing on the Roberta Flack version myself, but this version I will throw on. You know, it's more accessible to like the newer generation. I guess that was sort of the point of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. I think I mean Lauren Hill makes it her own, so it's yeah. I'm more likely to throw this one on. For the longest time I thought the song was called "Killing Them Softly," but it's actually "Killing Me Softly," and the reason that is because I think the original producers of the original track, they wouldn't sign off on it if they changed it or something like that. So that's why they had to keep it as "Killing Me Softly." But
Really?
yeah, no, I remember, like, to me, the biggest song, I'll agree that I think this is the biggest one. I mean, it sold the most. But yeah, it was always between this and Ready or Not. Those were always like staples
Yeah.
on Much Music, watching
I
these.
like I like on for when you're listening through on the album before "Killing Me Softly" at the end of "Family Business" on like the skit where she kind of starts singing the song with different lyrics.
Oh,
But
yeah.
like your brain, when you first hear it and you haven't listened to it in a long time, you just kind of forget because you normally just throw the song on. When she starts singing, it's like it does like a weird trick to your brain because like it's Lauren Hill and she's singing the song, but she's not singing the right words. What's going on? Was the album version different? And you start questioning all this stuff. You're like, oh no, wait, that's the skit.
Yep.
Yeah.
And this
Yeah,
is why
she's
we have
like-
skits.
Yeah, she's like rapping or like talking about killing like other rappers and stuff like that. And it's like, wait, I don't remember this, but yeah, no, I know what you mean. It's that for sure. So I guess we can ask the next question here. Well, sorry, Ryan, do you think it's "Killing Me Softly" as well?
That's
Did
what
you
I imagine, yeah, because of the cover deal. Although, yeah, Ready or Not, both of those songs I associate with like junior high dances. I don't know why.
Yeah. Would you think any of those songs are overplayed? Or is there a song on here that's overplayed? I guess you went backwards to find it. So, I mean, the overplayed question, I'm not sure on this one.
I mean, at the time, maybe, but like I don't know because I wasn't exposed to that. I mean, like you, Anise, you're a MTV guy, Much Music
How
guy.
much we
So did it get a lot?
nonstop. It was
Nonstop.
like back then. It was overplayed, like to the point of like at first, like "Killing Me Softly" and "Ready or Not" were those songs that they weren't really what I was into at the time, but they would come on. I kind of let it play through, but then after a while, it's just like, really again. I guess it's just like a testament of how big it was. But yeah, and I remember even just getting to a point where it was like, play Fuji Law sometimes. Like just throw that into the mix because
Please.
yeah, because like at the time, like you're just seeing the same artist over and over and over again. Like you're a kid. You're really you didn't. There's no internet. I wasn't a big fan of the radio for whatever reason. I like the visual aspect of it as well. So yeah, after a while, I was like, Jesus Christ, play something else.
Yeah, the fact that I had a really strong association with these songs, even though I avoided the album, I mean, it's got to show that it got played a lot.
Yeah.
Even I didn't listen to any pop radio stations either, and just just the school influence.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of their popularity at that, or I'll hold off on that. We'll save it for place in history. So yeah, I when I was younger, I mean, I remember hearing the song and just like the sample for like "Ready or Not" when that comes on as a kid. I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. So that song I was always looking forward to when I was playing. I do think "Killing Me Softly" was probably the one that was probably maybe a little overplayed. But I mean, now that I'm a bunch of years removed from it, I love it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think we could probably give it that one. I wonder if there's a way where we could find how many counts, like Much Music counts,
Yeah.
like YouTube video plays, so you can see.
I will
Those
say
songs.
though, I will say that the album kind of at this point kind of sounds a little dated, so that might relegate it just to like the oldies hour or whatever on the pop radio stations.
Oh yeah, I doubt you're gonna hear it very often, like just in the regular mix with modern
Yeah.
stuff. But if they're gonna play "Killing Me Softly," it's probably gonna be that version. And if they're gonna play a song from this album, it's probably gonna be "Killing Me Softly."
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, what's your favorite song, Anise?
I wrote down "Ready or Not" just because there was like a few months ago, for some reason, it was just stuck in my head constantly. And I was listening to it a lot. But also, like about a year and a half ago, I put this like '90s playlist, '90s hip hop playlist together, and I was throwing in different. I had Fuji Law on it at one point. I had the score on it at one point. So I like. They have so many of these like very solid, just straight up like rap songs, which those are. I don't want to say they're interchangeable, but they all have like their own charms and stuff. So, but like songs like the score, I'm a big fan of that as well. So, Ready or Not, and the score, I'd probably say those are my two favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Ryan?
A little hard to settle because there's a few I like. Fuji Law is really good too.
Yeah.
But I just want to stick up for Zealots because it's got this really cool rhythm thing that's going on. They have like a sample that's in 3/4, and then they put underneath it they put a 4/4 drum beat. When the 4/4 drum beat comes in, it's just so awesome. And not only that, they're taking like the 16th notes on the kick drum and they're kind of like squishing them. They're swinging them, pushing them. So there's all these like tensions in the beat, and it sounds really funky. Like it reminded me of back in college when I was in like the master class, Mark Kelso's master class. He was like, "Okay, guys, this is how you play groovy. You gotta count 3s in your head and play 2s on the hi-hat." And he would get us all to do this. Like he would get us to come to the front of the class and try to do this. And when a student starts to think that way, you notice this little funky dirtiness, this like a bit of a glitch that ends up in your hand, and it feels really good. It's like this tension that feels really good. Anyway, so I just love when that came in. Music nerding out a little bit, but yeah.
I actually had that one pointed out too as like one of my favorite beats on here.
Yeah.
And I looked it up. It's a sample of the Flamingo song "I Only Have Eyes for You."
Do it up. 1, 2, 3, do. Love it.
I really like the sample on that song. And yeah, I actually wrote down. I made a note of the sample as well too, because it's like a classic song you hear.
But it's like, what is it? That was what it was for me. It's like I know I've heard this song like a million times, but what is the song?
Yeah, you hear it in movies. You hear it in probably other songs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess for my favorite, I had Ready or Not as well. So there's like so many interesting things about the song. I guess you and I, Anis, we agree with President Barack Obama, or former President Barack Obama, his all-time favorite song as well.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Who was the artist? Remember a couple of years, I say a couple of years, it's probably been like 10 or 15 years. Was it Mario Winans that used that same beat and rapped over?
Yeah, I remember it was like Puff Daddy. I just remember the extra cheese.
I think Puff Daddy produced it or something. But
yeah, I remember using the video, so you had to produce it.
I think part of the reason why I grew to like Ready or Not more, because there was a time where I thought that song was so overplayed just because of how much this album was played.
Yeah.
But I think when that version came out, it was like, what are you doing? What do you think you're doing? Don't do that. Stop what you're doing.
So I guess that's when he like jumps the shark, when he's like stealing samples of like stuff that like was out when he was out, like in the 90s, right? Like he's not the 70s samples anymore.
Yeah, he's literally sampling a song that's sampling another song. It's like like inception.
I'm down for that, man. Sample all the way.
I'm down for it too, but it was pretty much just the same beat. And it's like, okay.
That's the other thing though. If you're gonna sample something, I think that
do something with it.
Yeah, like if you, to avoid like having to pay so much like copyright and royalties, I think you should be able to manipulate it by a certain amount. And if it's a certain amount different, I know it's really hard to measure any of this stuff, then it's cool. But if you're directly just like copying something, and you're obviously just like using the beat and just adding different raps, obviously then you're not mixing it up.
He's like, how much money do I have to pay? There you go.
I think how they generally try to settle these things is like, well, how much of the song's success is due to whatever element you're fighting over. If it's like a lyric or a guitar solo or the beat. It's like, okay, how much did the beat have to do with it? If the beat has everything to do with it, then...
Well, that's if you're getting sued, but if you get permission, it's all figured out before.
Oh yeah.
So funny story about the sample. Also in that Proz interview that I saw just before we started, he talks about that sample specifically. So originally it's Enya's Boudica, and they didn't ask for permission. They just sampled it, and then the reasoning or the logic behind it was Proz made the call, and he was like the decision not to clear it, and he's like, this album's gonna blow up, but it's not gonna blow up it's not gonna be nobody in Ireland's gonna hear this song. And then he's like, this album ended up going #1 in Ireland. So like Enya or her people like called Fugees or their representation was like, yeah, you didn't clear it, so you take it off the album. And they're like, well, we can't do that. So she's like, well, write a big check then. So they wrote her a $3 million check, and
Shit.
yeah, I think they thank her in the liner notes. I couldn't find my CD, but they thank her profusely in the liner notes and all that stuff, and I'm sure she gets royalties from it as well.
And Enya's like, ready or not, you got to sign me that check.
So I thought that was pretty cool, and just like the way Praz was talking about it, he's like, yeah, she burned us even harder because like we didn't clear it, and then like we more or less lied about it. So yeah, we knew we were in the wrong, and then so it was $3 million. Basically, they split it 3 ways. So he's like, that's $1 million out of my pocket, but it is what it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think this probably came out right around the time when you had to start clearing stuff. Like before then, it was kind of a free for all.
Yeah, like Paul's just see Paul's Boutique by the Beastie Boys.
Beastie Boys.
That could never happen today.
Yeah, I wonder how many other things weren't cleared on this. Like there may be other things that weren't cleared, little bits
Probably.
in the background that you're like, it's manipulated enough. It's like nobody could figure out what this.
Yeah.
Like I swear, you can hear Harmon mute trumpet in one tune. I'm like, is that Miles Davis in the back? I don't know.
Yeah. And I guess another favorite song that I had when I was younger, I had No Woman, No Cry. To me, that was my favorite song when I was a kid listening to this album. But I've since grown up.
That's a song too. I think Wyclef still performs just like on his own.
Yeah, it's pretty catchy. You could tell it's almost like it's meant for the radio. Well, plus it's more or less like a Bob Marley cover. But
yeah, well, I wrote something down. It said this on. I never read this before, but I guess this is why. So that song is written by Bob Marley, but he credited to a Vincent Ford, who is a friend of Bob Marley, who owns a kitchen in Trenchtown, a ghetto in Kingston, Jamaica. So all the royalties go pretty much towards that. So I wonder if that's partially why maybe they covered it on the album. That was one of my initials. When I read that, I'm like, maybe they just put on the album so royalties kind of keep funneling to that kitchen for the.
I don't know.
Okay.
What I read,
I just really like the song, but it seems like something Wyclef would get behind and be like, "Yo, we should cover this. The money will go towards because they're gonna have to clear it regardless to cover. Might as well cover something where the money's going to a good cause."
Yeah,
it could just be coincidence, but I'd like to think they did it intentionally.
I heard that Bob Marley like just gave the other guy the writing credits to avoid like some contract. Some contractual obligation, like to avoid having to maybe pay some cut, or maybe so he could still earn the money, but not have to pay. I don't know what the hell the deal was, but I don't think this was the only song he signed over to that guy though.
Yeah, that's cool.
Interesting. Yeah, we should do Bob Marley. I've been to his house.
I've been to his house.
Oh yeah, you and I were there. Yeah, that was awesome. We saw that guy. Got the crazy laugh. But sorry, moving on. And there's one other thing I wanted to ask specifically for this album, and you kind of hinted at it earlier, Anis. What is your favorite instrumental from this album, if you had to pick one or two?
Well, I like the one that Ryan pointed out, the Zealots.
Yeah.
I was gonna say this for I'll kind of answer two because I was gonna say this song for underrated.
Yeah.
But How Many Mics? I like how that song just kind of kicks off the album. It's like your classic sort of boom bap, but they're kind of attacking it different. They're just sort of it's like a pure just braggadocious talking about themselves. But it's like the type of beat where I could see like from that same era, I could have seen like Wu-Tang on that exact same beat, but it's like a whole different complexion with the three of them on it as opposed to like something more hardcore. So it was like sort of like a different look on, especially as a kid, you're just sort of what the media would tell you, like hip hop's all dangerous and stuff. But then a song like this pops on, it's like, oh shit, they're just having fun. It's like the Beastie Boys, just talking about how good they are and just kind of bouncing their verses back and forth. But yeah, I like that beat. Just sort of I know it's nothing special, but just sort of brings me back to like an era of like the 90s.
Yeah, there's a few beats on there though that like I had a note for like Fugees. I'm like, this sounds like something where Biggie could rap over it. Like they
Yeah.
mixed in those like those I'll call them like classic '90s, but like almost like that New York beat that like you heard on Biggie's tracks or and all the artists around that time, like Wu-Tang and stuff like that. So yeah, so I had
Yeah,
Fugees as one, and then I had I think I had the Beast as another one.
That was a good one.
Yeah. How about you, Ryan?
Yeah, Fuji Law is pretty awesome beat. That's one of the ones where I think they squish that 16th note kick drum. They keep doing this all over the album, where it's like boom right at the end of the bar. It's like it's really hard to play because your kick drum is like on a different frame than your hands, so you just got to be a little bit faster in the kick. Anyways, that's like one where they really hammer that home. Another cool thing about Fuji Law is that sample, the synth. I'm sure it's not synth. It might be. It was a sample of something. It's like kind of intertwined with the guitar, so they never like line up perfectly, and it's really nice because you've always got like a beat to focus. You know, they're always like your focus is kind of bouncing between the different instruments. And for me, anyway, I like that one. Also, Family Business. Okay, it's got this like classical guitar sample. Now I'm wondering if Wyclef played it. Maybe not. It is like nylon strings, so maybe not. But
Probably.
he maybe did, but it sounds like it's a loop, so who knows? But that's another case where they did this like 3/4 tension thing, but in this case it's like quarter note triplets, so it's the resolution of the 3/4 is like twice as long. Anyway, I love how they're playing with that stuff. I don't know how if they're probably not thinking of it theoretically. They're just like putting two things on top of each other. That sounds cool, but I don't know. Yeah, that I think what else is great. I don't know if there's so many great little beats on little moments on the album, and it's all usually with just three instruments, maybe four, but yeah, just three.
Yeah. One thing, I guess, kind of going even further, like into your favorite skit. I love the skit on the score where they're talking about Michelle Leslie Brown from 225th Street. Just like that stuff's pretty funny. I don't. Some of the other skits might be dated. I mean, with the whole thing with the Asian restaurant thing, I don't know if people might look at that differently now. But back in the day, it's just good comedy. Like nobody's.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wasn't sure how to feel about that when it first started. I was like, oh, this probably did not date well. But by the end of
it's not the name. It's like you kind of cringe, like the Chinese restaurant skit or whatever. Like, oh.
Yeah.
But by the end of it, the guy's beating up punching the aggressors. So it's like, you know, the little guy wins in the end or whatever. I don't know. It's probably still too racist. Just cancel it.
Yeah.
Oh, one more beat I wanted to point out. It was The Mask. That's the one with like the harmonium trumpet. That's a pretty cool jazzy beat. I like a lot. I don't know if it's Miles Davis. I don't know. He's like the most famous guy with the harmonium, so.
That has my favorite. The Mask has my favorite prose verse, probably on the album.
Yeah.
He even mentions Biggie Smalls on it. It's funny,
Yeah.
He talks about listening to too much Biggie Smalls.
Yeah. Too much gangster rap.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, one thing I wanted to point out. I don't know. Well, one time because I wanted to mention Cowboys as well. I like the features on that and how they use the features. It isn't like because they had the Outsiders, Pace One, Young Z, and Raw Digga. And I like how each verse is one member from each group, and they're kind of passing the bars back and forth. It isn't usually when you see a feature on a song, it's like one guy goes, next guy goes, next guy goes, next guy goes. Whereas this actually feels like a collaboration, and they do it all over the album. Like even with Diamond D on the score and like on Family Business and stuff, it isn't just like the feature is just there. It's an actual collaboration. They're bouncing lines off of each other. They're talking back and forth in the lines and stuff. So it's a different. You don't really see that very often with a feature, at least. Like you might see it like Raekwon and Ghostface Killer might do it, or like the Beastie Boys do it. But beyond that, it's not something you don't really see beyond like a group.
Yeah.
Especially
Even just thinking about like the Kanye West album from last week. most of that's like a verse. And, I mean, the whole thing is like a verse. Maybe
Yeah.
there's a couple spots where there's some overlap, but I didn't even notice how much overlap there is in this, and it's nice. It's nice. It's more
Yeah, and
interaction.
it's very natural. Like, because even like a bar where like it's just Lauryn Hill, you'll get Wyclef Jean adding like some ad libs, or on Praz's verse, you'll get Lauryn Hill adding adverbs. So it seems very like every song just seems very busy. Because even
Yeah.
though like you're saying the track, like they're not layering many tracks for the beat, but even just the vocals, it's like all three of them are just always active, even if they're not particularly singing. They're there.
Yeah. It's definitely about the vocals. Like the beats are important, but like
Yeah.
they're leading the way for sure. I mean, it's a rap album.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like they do work off each other, like Wyclef Jean and Lauryn Hill, especially like throughout
Especially,
the album. They work off each other really well.
Yeah, I know it's always funny because it's always like them two are working off each other in their verses, and then Praz at the end.
I know.
He closes it out. He's the
It's
closer.
like his bars are usually good and solid, and it's not like I don't like Praz, but it's just when you're listening to the album, you can almost tell that there is some sort of like a lot of the collaboration was coming between Wyclef and because even in that last track when it says album was produced by, it says Wyclef and Lauryn Hill, but in the credits it says Fugees. So,
Right.
well,
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely some infighting going on, some issues. Oh well, that's why they had to break up.
So what do you think is an underrated track on this album, Ryan?
Jesus, I don't really know what's rated, but let me pick something that's not a single that I think could be or should be. Maybe the score, just because the score's verses are really good, and so I feel like that's not enough to carry a song in the pop world, but it should be. Like verses need respect, so yeah.
And they do something interesting on that one. They do like a lot of reprises of like the hooks of the songs kind of throughout the album. Like I've noticed. What I don't know what was the kind of the reasoning of that, or is it just because it's like the name of the album?
I maybe I don't know. I feel like because it was the title track, they really had to kill it with the raps. So it was about because like Wyclef comes in really hard, and Praz is okay, but Lauryn Hill kills it at the end. So yeah, how could you let that one go? And since it's a rap album, why not have the title track feature rap? So yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Denise?
Well, I kind of said like the opening track, but I'll say for underrated, Praz. Praz is the most underrated. Think the guy is the one who pretty much brought the group together, and then clearly he was probably holding them all together. It sounds like during the recording of this and probably afterwards. He had a huge song afterwards from like the soundtrack with ODB, like Ghetto Superstar Maya. That song was the biggest song ever.
Mhm.
Like at the time when that song dropped, you would have probably like bet the house that he probably followed up with something. And I feel like he's never really mentioned. It's always Lauryn Hill and Wyclef, which yes, they went on to become like bigger than the album pretty much. But I don't know, Praz, he always sort of gets left out of the conversation. Even us now talking about him are kind of like half laughing, and he's pretty much just an investor now. But I don't know, he's solid on this album. Like he sounds great on like The Mask. I love his verse. Fuji Law, he's great on that. Like he's featured really well all over this thing.
He seems like the mature one. I'm gonna just go invest my money. You guys can go screw things up.
Well, there's a funny story I read about. So the staying on Praz with Ghetto Superstar. Apparently, the way ODB ended up on that song was he accidentally wandered into the studio. Like he walked into the wrong studio. He liked the beat and asked to be on it.
Nice.
It's funny, like I can't imagine that song now without him.
Yeah.
Like it's like so much a part of it.
Well, I guess Praz would have technically been bigger at the time, like in terms of like popularity and clout. Like I know ODB is kind of like the crazy one in Wu-Tang, and Wu-Tang was pretty big at the time.
Yeah, they're probably equal footing for, I don't know. I guess he's a little bigger. The score was huge, but it's again, he's like the the forgotten one. Everyone talks about Wyclef and Lauryn Hill.
Yeah, he's kind of like the middle child because he's like, I think Wyclef was born 69 and then he's, I think, 72 or 73, and then Lauryn Hill's 10 years older than us in 75. So yeah, he's got the middle child, but he's definitely like the spine. He's the reason that those three are together.
Yeah, no, his bars are usually pretty consistent. He has a pretty unique voice. And like he just sort of comes in and does his thing, and it's always at the end, but it's never like, oh, his verse sucks, I'm gonna skip to the next track. He always let every song play out. Like he's solid.
But he solidly showed up.
Yeah, but obviously, like we're listening to Lauryn Hill and Wyclef are like the big talents, but he's also important. He's there. He's the glue.
Yep.
He's the glue. Yeah, that interview is pretty good that I saw on YouTube. It's DJ Vlad. I guess he just interviews rappers. It's from 2016, so it's 5 years old. But just like watching him answer the questions, he seems like he's like almost being interrogated. He doesn't want to give up much information, but he's still being truthful and giving cool, interesting tidbits. So he seems like a really interesting guy. So I wonder if he's on any podcast. I'll look out for him. So is there a song that you skip on this one? I guess I'll kick it off by answering first. I don't know if there's any songs that I skip, but how do you guys feel about the skits? Like, do you feel like they should be like on this album? It's okay because they're at the end of the tracks. But how do you guys feel about skits? Like, do you think they work better like as individual tracks, or do you prefer them like this, where they're kind of at the end of a song?
Well, I get why they're not individual tracks, because if they're individual tracks, they'd probably get skipped, especially nowadays in like the streaming world.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably like the one thing I do skip. Like when I do go, like for me, like we're talking at the beginning, when I listen to them, it's usually just specific songs I'll jump to or throw on like a song on a playlist. So if I decide to throw the album on, I'll usually just let it play through. Other than the skits, I usually skip them. Even this week listening through the album, the first time listening to the skits, the second time I was just kind of hitting next when they got to them. I like that they're at the end of the song, because when they're at the beginning, it's sort of like, okay, song doesn't start till a minute 20 or something.
Mm-hmm.
But then when it's at the end, it kind of, when you put on a playlist, it kind of ruins the flow of the playlist if the song has a skit at the end. So I'm not a fan of skits.
I think that's the kicker. Does it help the flow or does it ruin the flow? Does it take you out of the cool place that you were at the end of every song, or does it help like maybe a transition from one thing to the next? And I noticed a few spots, particularly after Killing Me Softly, like probably because that was like more down tempo, kind of song, and the score is more aggressive. You get like a pretty good scene change between the two. So
yeah, well, we wanted to make the album cinematic.
Yeah,
that's why. Now, like I understand, like the skits and stuff out between, it does make the album flow better. Don't get me wrong, but the album is an hour long, so if you're trying to, like, if you're just putting it on, especially I was listening to it a lot, just kind of chilling outside because the weather was so nice this week, and you're chilling outside, you're playing music, you don't want like a minute skit with like two people arguing or something. You know what I mean? It's just like I want to keep the vibe, even though it keeps the album flowing. The skits, I want to keep the vibe going with the beats. So
like if you put it on at a party.
Yeah.
Like every 5 minutes, the volume's gonna drop down. There's gonna be like quiet talking in the background. Like that's gonna ruin the vibe. Yeah.
Yep.
Skip.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with what you guys are saying in the sense that like now that we've gotten older and we're kind of like in a different streaming age, like for creating playlists alone, it feels good just to like have that as a separate track. I know that's kind of where like streaming and me saying that sounds strange, like that's pure millennial. And then you have like their intentions on putting this album together. They see it as art. They want to make like an audio film, like Lauryn Hill's quoted as saying like, I want to make this as something where it's like back in the day when you were listening to the radio, like in the 40s, you had all kinds of different forms of entertainment. And you were like, maybe there's some news or maybe there's some like other things going on. So it was varied. So that's why they did it on this album. It's more for the whole experience as opposed to like the tracks. But after you listen to the album a few times, you pretty much just want to hear the tracks. You don't care for the skits. So you want to skip them, right?
Yeah. And that's like a lot of albums. Like even some albums, like some of the skits are actually funny. Like they'll be good and hilarious and stuff. But at the same time, it's like I usually just want to listen to the song.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, you can't listen to the same joke over and over. You kind of you
Yeah.
stop laughing eventually.
Yeah.
Same
Right.
song you can listen over and over and over. It's great.
Are skits still common, or are they? Is it more like
I don't think so.
They're still there. They still
Really?
do it.
they still
Yeah,
do it?
there's like certain albums still have it.
You know what I find kind of like took the place of skits was extended music videos where you'd have like some cinematic crap at the beginning
Yeah.
or end. So that way your album can be concise and then your video can have a longer view duration on YouTube.
Yeah, that's something like artists should play with more nowadays because people are sitting on their computer now. It's easier to just make like I guess like Beyonce did like the visual poem or whatever, whatever it was called. So I guess some artists are embracing it, but yeah, it seems like the music video has sort of died in a way, and it seems like I don't know. You think like YouTube is so big and the visual element is still kind of there.
It's just
Yeah.
a different thing because MTV has kind of died in a way.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, those are dead.
because we don't have the same, oh, let's go to this let's everybody tune into this channel and see what's going to be on this show tonight. It's that whole culture is evaporated. So you can't get like, yeah.
It's a damn shame.
Yeah, let's blow up Skynet.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess did you guys have any final thoughts or any songs that you want to talk about that we may have passed over just before we move on?
Ready or not, here we go.
I think we've touched on
No.
most.
One random thing. I like the airplane seatbelt chime that just kind of like helps transition songs like that. Boom! Just it's cool. I don't know. It's a weird noise like to have on an album. It doesn't feel like it should be long there, but it's a good kind of transition. I think it's kind of used sporadically. I think it's only on there like 3 or 4 times. But that was cool.
Turntables, they show up in Manifest. I noted no turntables, and at least not obvious turntables until.
Well, I guess I know.
No scratching.
Well, I think isn't DJ Scribble featured on one track?
That's probably Manifest.
Yeah, the outro. All right, so yeah, I guess with that, for the artwork, I couldn't find this album. I had it on CD. It was a CD that I had to buy on my own later on. So I think I finally bought it in like the early 2000s. I remember the cool thing about it though is like I like the font, I like the style that they were going for with the cover, and even like even the cover of the album, you can kind of almost see the dysfunction. Like it's shrouded in black, and they're all looking in different directions. They're not looking at you. They're not looking at each other.
And they're all
a cool cover.
Like they're all their own separate circle. Like none of them are in the same shot.
None of them are touching or overlapping. It's very distinct like that.
Yeah, I know. I tried finding my CD too. I think I might have even had it on tape. Can't remember. For some
Just
reason,
check out the thumbnail.
the tape.
Check out the
Oh yeah.
The thumbnail.
So this one, I guess we can kind of pass over pretty quickly. Normally I'm stressing about how this question goes for other, like last week. But where do you rank this album in the band's discography or in the group's discography?
Well, I didn't really listen to their first album. I remember listening to it years ago and not really being a fan, so I didn't sort of bother going back to it. But I did listen to like Miseducation and Carnival, so I'll rank those 3 because I don't know, they're always like related in my head. So I'd probably go Miseducation, then The Score, then the Carnival. Not that the Carnival is bad, it's just the other 2 I just listened to more. At that point, Carnival has some great tracks though. There's some tracks I revisit all the time on there. So
yeah,
they're all solid.
Yeah, same order for me, except for Carnival. I haven't listened to yet, so I should probably check that out. Seems like it's probably good.
Yeah, good album.
Yeah, I remember I always liked the song. Was it like Gunpowder or Gunsmoke?
Yeah, it's a good song.
Cool. And then Staying Alive, and classic. But yeah, so I did listen to Blunted Reality today or this week. Blunted on Reality, the name. So it's good, but the problem with it is. Not that I'm like a hip hop or rap expert or anything, but just my observations on it. It sounds like early 90s hip hop. So I looked into it, and basically the problem with that album is the producers had too much control. Like the they're quick to admit like they weren't producing the tracks or they weren't involved in that the way they wanted to be. And then the other thing is that album was recorded in 1992, but didn't come out until 1994. So in those 2 years, you pretty much have like one of the greatest seismic shifts in like hip hop music with like Biggie, Wu-Tang, Nas coming out, like just totally transforming it. So I think that led to a lot of what you see in this album. They were basically they were given advance. The Rough House executives they gave them, I think, $135,000 advance, and they're like, we're just going to give you all creative freedom. You guys do what you want with that money and come back with an album. And so this is what they came back with.
And actually, just when you said Nas, it reminded me during this time when you get all this Fugees stuff played on the radio, you also had Lauryn Hill featured on "If I Ruled the World" by Nas. That was also a song that got a lot of play during that time too. So that had them kept them in the zeitgeist during that time.
So yeah, I thought that was. I did go back and listen to it. It's one of I think I've heard it once before, but it's one of those albums that I don't really revisit that often. I don't know if I'm sure they stand by it, but I think this.
No, they don't. I don't think they do actually. But
oh, really? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised based on the lack of control that they had, but I mean, you can still see what is it like? Is it Nappy Hair or Nappy Head and Vocal and some other tracks like they're around, like you see them on YouTube and in related links and stuff like that. So I guess my ranking, if I had to rank those three, I'd probably go probably Miseducation, such a great album, and then the score. It's hard because I have such nostalgia for it.
I know the score is just, when I think of the album, I just think of the 90s. It's just, I don't know. In my brain, it's just one of those images. I'm like, that album cover is just so connected in the 90s for me.
And even when you go back and listen to it, like this week, I haven't heard it in a couple years. So when I went back and listened to it this week, just even like the dated movie references, they're referencing like The Mask with Jim Carrey. They're referencing like True Lies, like Harlem Nights, like all these like late 80s, early 90s movies. So it's like, just makes you even more nostalgic for the 90s.
For sure. Newt Gingrich makes it in there too.
Newt Gingrich has as a reference, I guess.
Yeah. What's really interesting, I just wanted to point out that like in the outro, there's a bit of, we kind of talked about this before going live, that how political they are. Nothing's really overtly political on the album, I would say. I don't know if you guys would agree.
Well, except for the one track where what's it called? Sorry?
Yeah, well, the outro specifically, there's that little skit where they're talking about, who you should kill. Like, it's not impressive to be killing each other. It's who the real enemy is the up tops. It's just so funny that they're talking about economic justice, and it's like you could have put that on an album today and it would be more true today than it was back then. So it's like
things don't change. And then like the song I was thinking of was The Beast. That song is about police brutality.
Right.
That's also still relevant that we saw last year with all the big, the George Floyd and the marches and everything. So
it's kind of sad. It's kind of sad.
It is sad. It is sad. It seems like just things never. It seems like as much as we think things change, it doesn't really change. It doesn't really get better. It just sort of changes.
Except we got smartphones and a lot of other stuff now, but it's the same battles.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the difference now is like it's just getting recorded. Everybody has access to record it, as opposed to like back in the 90s, unless like there's like a random person with a camcorder that captures it, or you're pretty much hearing about it through like hip hop and
like how James Cameron filmed Rodney King.
Yeah, that's a weird
rumor.
A weird rumor. I guess with that we can move on to the next one. Okay, so this is tough. You can answer it however you want, but is this the group's peak? Like, I guess we kind of have to say it is, but like, how do you want to? You can quantify that however you want.
Well, yeah, I think it's the group's peak, just like how I was saying earlier, how each member went on to have success. Like after this album, I think it was the next year, you had The Carnival come out, where he had a bunch of big singles like Not Staying Alive one, and then he had Gone Till November.
Mm-hmm.
And then he even I think around that time he worked with like Destiny's Child, like he did the remix and stuff, kind of put them on the map. And then you had Miseducation come out in '98, and then you had Get a Superstar come out in '98. So it's like they just pretty much off of this album, they all sort of had individual success. So yeah, this is like
Yeah.
sort of their peak. But then as a group, but then individually, you can, that's a whole different conversation, I guess.
Were
Yeah,
they
it's cool.
technically broken up at that point, like in '98? When did they officially call it? Did they?
Like 05 is when they officially called it.
Oh,
So like,
so technically, they were biggest time was probably '98 as a group.
because
I
yeah,
mean,
collectively, like
still a
separately,
group.
but
Yeah.
yeah, that could be.
Probably not, because 98 you still had the like Gone Till November playing on the radio, and then you had Miseducation drop, won all the Grammys, and then Ghetto Superstar was like fucking biggest thing for that year. Like the song was bigger than the movie that it was made for. So
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder
Were
if we
people
can.
expecting another album to drop, or were they like, Fugees are like at that point, years are passing. But were they Were they playing at all? Were they performing or?
Well, they toured, and then I'm sure everybody wanted. Like I know Wyclef wanted to get back together, but then I think Lauryn Hill more or less wanted to have a break so she could work on her solo stuff.
Yeah.
And then so that's kind of where they broke it off, like more or took a break, so they could work on their solo stuff. They kind of pivoted. So it's interesting that you say like maybe 1998 is their peak, even though they're not working together per se.
yeah,
Big
probably,
group.
maybe, yeah, because like that's when, like for me, like what we're saying, we didn't really get into them for later. Like, so like when I was listening to Miseducation of Lauryn Hill song, that wasn't like I was a Fugees fan per se at that point. I knew who they were, but I'd never listened to the score from top to bottom at that point.
Yeah.
So yeah, they kind of like kept their name in the zeitgeist, and it kind of grew their status as legends or whatever you want to call them.
I think we found it there. I think it's 1998. I mean, because without being the Fugees, they wouldn't have had that success. They needed to step off of the Fugees to be what they were. Maybe they would have found it in different ways, their success, because I mean, they're all really talented. But I think with the Fugees, it just was, it put them at a certain level, and then it just launched them into the stratosphere, or they could step off into something even higher.
Yeah, like Miseducation wouldn't exist without the score, but that was like when the score came out, it was like the biggest shit. And yeah, they were all had their own individual. You knew them by name at that point. They weren't just Fugees.
Right. That's a good way. Yeah. I mean, U2, Bono called them hip hop's version of the Beatles. There's Fuji Mania around that time. So yeah, they were really blowing up. All right. So, sorry, Ryan, did you agree? 1998, I guess, is their peak, or how do you feel?
It was my idea. So yeah.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. Great idea. So I guess their place in history, we've kind of been talking about it. So I do have a couple other things some weird random pieces of trivia for like Lauryn Hill. I'll just go over those, and then you guys can add on whatever. So Lauryn Hill went to high school in Columbia High School, which is in New Jersey. It's in Maplewood, New Jersey. That's where she met Praz, and she was in her class with her was Zach Braff, who was like from Scrubs, the creator of Scrubs, or
The creator of Scrubs.
He's not the
He
creator.
was the star of Scrubs.
The star, yeah. He wrote and directed Garden State. So yeah, everybody knows who Zach Braff is. So yeah, it's interesting that they were in high school together. And then for Lauryn Hill, there's a YouTube video that I watched just before we came on as well, of her at I think it's like a Soul Train show, or sorry, amateur night at Showtime at the Apollo, and she's singing Smokey Robinson cover of Who's Loving You, and she's 13 years old, and she's getting booed. Like they start booing, like she goes on, she's like this little girl, and after I would say like 30 seconds in, everybody starts booing, like not everybody, but people are starting to boo, and then she just powers through it and finishes the song. So by the end, the reaction's like some applause, but there's still some boos. So I thought that was an interesting piece.
Who the fuck boos a
I
kid?
I don't know.
Boo, grow up.
And then Lauryn Hill, she didn't want to model her rapping style off of other female rappers at the time, like Salt and Pepper and MC Lyte. So she preferred to model her stuff after male rappers like Ice Cube and the more like progressive, I guess, like Biggie, I guess at the time, like those who are changing how hip hop's going and stuff like that.
I like her flow because she has like an aggression to it, but it still like has a nice sort of like light flow to it. Like it's still chill.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Kind of like, well, you mentioned Biggie kind of is able to hit that same sort of vibe too on songs where he's aggressive but still chill.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It is a
Content.
fun balance.
The content is a lot different, but
Yeah. So do you always like when you think I probably already know the answer to this, but when you think of like greatest like female rappers, do you put Lauryn Hill in that, or do you think she's just out of the limelight too much to she's not like a go-to?
you have to include her because when you listen to any, not even just like any R&B artist currently working, any hip hop artist currently working, female and male. Like I know what's his name, Drake has been a huge fan of Lauryn Hill, even sampled her and what was that song?
Was it X Factor?
He sampled X Factor, but what was the Drake song? I forget, but whatever.
Yeah.
He sampled her and stuff. So her influence is just sort of everywhere. Her name is just mentioned. Like I'm pretty sure if you looked up any like female specific hip hop artists working today, but even some of the males, they all mention her by name. So it's like her legacy is just kind of through the roof, and not just rap, but like R&B singers as well, pop singers. Like she's just sort of like that peak.
Yeah.
She's what I like when I think of female rapper, like that's like just the Lauryn Hill just pops into my head, just that association's built. And I don't really know like what female rap was like before Lauryn Hill, because it seems to me like there, at least since her, there hasn't really been a divide in like, okay, this is what guys sound like and this is what girls sound like when they rap. Is that, like you said, she didn't want to follow like the style of Salt and Pepper? That's what.
Well, there was also like back then there was also like Queen Latifah and like MC Lyte.
Yeah.
There was other rappers as well.
Yeah. I guess when I think of it,
There's more coming out around this time because this is like you're getting into like I guess like Foxy Brown, Little Kim. I mean, you can even include TLC. Like I know Left Eye was more of a rapper. I guess it's like the 90s were kind of like the emergence towards the second half for sure. That's when they were really blowing up.
Yeah, because even like Raw Digga's on this album. She would later on, I believe she was with like Flip Mode Squad after, like on Busta Rhymes.
Yeah.
I'm not confusing her with someone else.
Oh yeah, I got to mention it that Drake song was Nice for What.
Yeah, that's it. Nice for What.
Yeah. And then I guess one other piece of trivia, it's like kind of like a weird question I'll ask you guys, see if you can get it. But so this was the third highest selling album of 1996. Can you guys name the other two, or do you guys want to take any guesses at what the other two highest selling albums of 1996 were? I'll give you a clue if you guys aren't sure. And the albums might not necessarily have come out in 1996. There's a small clue there.
One of them from 95.
It could have been.
It definitely is. What the hell is happening in 95?
96.
I'll just get you to name the artists too. You don't have to name like their albums.
Is it a band we've talked about?
Number 4 is, but no. I'll give you one more clue, and this'll really
pretty
help.
broad, but is it the Spice Girls? Is one of them the Spice Girls? Okay.
No. They're both female Canadian artists.
Oh, Alanis Morissette and
Celine Dion?
Faith Hill. No, not Faith Hill. Fucking Shania Twain.
No, yeah, sorry, Ryan was right. It was Celine Dion. But yeah, Jagged Little Pill, Alanis Morissette, and then Celine Dion with Falling Into You. So I just thought that was interesting to include that. And then number 4 was Tragic Kingdom by No Doubt, which we talked about.
Runs the World, Girls.
Yeah, it was
26 at least.
Yeah, Shania Twain was number 9, The Woman to Me.
Well, because what was that big album? That one like Diamond. What was that one called again? Yeah, that's
was it like Up?
No.
I'm getting way too much into this.
We'll save this for our Shania Twain episode.
We'll save it for our Shania episode. So I guess going back to the original question, where do you feel the Fugees, their place in history is, or is there anything you guys want to add to that? We've already talked about it quite a bit.
It's pretty much what I was saying. Like a lot of the, especially when you get to the female hip hop artists and female R&B singers, they always mention Lauryn Hill. I feel like Wyclef's a little left out of conversation. I feel like he's a little underrated for like what he brought to the Fugees, because this album's always listed as a favorite. But yeah, I don't know. This album's always like I was saying earlier, it's like the 90s to me, whereas like Miseducation's a little more timeless, whereas this album's more like more nostalgic, stuck in the 90s to me. Like if we had told me to name like 5 albums to represent the 90s, this might be one of them, just because there's something very 90s about. I can't explain what it is, but there's something very 90s about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. Their legacies. I think this album will always be constantly rediscovered. People will always want to learn about Lauryn Hill, and this is where it kind of begins, sort of. Well, Sister Act 2, but
Yeah.
but musically, like they had that first album, but really it's the score that kind of put her on the map and them on the map.
Yeah, a lot of spawned out of this album. Like this started a lot of things, so that's its place in history.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's important in terms of '90s history, and then yeah, their Miseducation is probably the one that's like the timeless.
Because normally, like when it comes to alternative hip hop from the '90s, usually people will mention just different artists. Like they'll be like, "Oh, Mos Def, oh, Talib Kweli, Common," but then they'll say the score. Like it's like Fugees, the score, this album. You know, it's there's something special about this album. It's more than just like, because I guess it really just encapsulates like what everyone loved about the Fugees, because that first album is sort of not talked about as much, and for whatever reason. But yeah.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, I think that Shania Twain album's Come On Over.
Yeah. That's
Popped in my head. I don't know when it came out.
Gordon has to represent because they're from the same hometown.
What I listened to growing up, it was from Timmins' own Shania Twain. All right, so I guess, did you guys have any final thoughts before we ask the question? Anything we missed?
Nothing I can think of.
I don't know. We all really like Lauryn Hill, and we actually all probably started with Lauryn Hill. So I'm curious to know how she may have inspired a lot of other female artists. I mean, we're not females, so we can't really put ourselves in that position. But like, I think she probably had a huge degree of influence, being like essentially the leader. At least if you look at the cover of the album, the leader of the band. And when you're listening to the album, like, I don't know, her verses always stick out as like really powerful. Like whenever she never drops it. Like I think the other two occasionally maybe like.
Well, she also like sings most of the hooks. It's either
she sings the hooks, yeah.
Either her or Wyclef or both of them, but yeah, usually her. It like she saves them from having to sample songs, so she'll just sing the hook instead.
There you go. Yeah, keep those mechanical royalties.
Just looking over, like, you could just check out her Wikipedia page, Lauryn Hill's Wikipedia page, and like just seeing like the people who have acknowledged her as an influence, it's like endless. Like you got like pretty much any major female artist. Plus you have Kanye West, you have Jay-Z, you have Kendrick Lamar. I'm pretty sure Kanye West is like rapped about Lauryn Hill in a bunch of his songs, like, and then he also samples her with like all Things Fall Down and stuff like that. So yeah, her influence is endless in terms of.
Because even here, like you can see, like Drake has sampled her twice, Cardi B has sampled her, Jay-Z has sampled her, Boogie with a Hoodie has sampled her, J. Cole has sampled her, Kanye West has sampled her. Like pretty much anyone who can afford it can sample her by the sounds of it. So I think that's like. Because especially for rap, they were like a newer, like they have roots beyond the 90s. Like, don't get me wrong, like 80s hip hop, 70s hip hop. But 90s is when it's sort of like you started getting different facets of it. It was more than just one genre of music. This was like an alternative hip hop. There was gangster rap. There was more of the pop rap, or, you know, just kind of getting different voices. And this is like one of the cornerstones. Like when you talk about alternative hip hop, which is still popular today, this is one of the early albums that fall into that category that will constantly be referenced forever. And since hip hop is a music that constantly just samples and finds new ways to manipulate the old and make it new again, it's already they're already being sampled. The Fugees, I just see that continuing to happen going in the future, and maybe we'll get more Lauryn Hill samples and maybe even some Wyclef, maybe even Pros samples. Who knows?
Yeah.
I'm sure these songs will make comebacks in one way or another.
Yeah. Killing Me Softly, at least, will be a standard. Somebody will cover this version.
Yeah, can't wait.
So I guess, with that, we could probably ask the question. We probably already know the answer, but I'd like to hear your answers anyway. Who wants to go first, or you want me to go first?
You can go, Gordon.
You go.
All right. So I guess, just building off what you were saying there, Anise, with like the sampling and like the influences and stuff like that. I'd say it's definitely essential. It's a '90s classic, and it's great in the way that it can mix together. You got your, I don't want to call them hardcore beats, but harder beats where anybody could rap on it. Like we're talking about Biggie rapping on it if he was so inclined to do so at that time. And then you also got the reggae. You have, I find this album really takes advantage of like Lauryn Hill's voice. When you look at the previous album that they did, it didn't have like that soul R&B, like which she's most powerful with, that voice. So it definitely comes through on this album. And I think over time it's only aged better, minus maybe some of the skits. But the music, the album as a whole has aged really well over time. It's only probably going to age better based on the direction of like how Kanye West, for example, has kind of pushed hip hop and the influences and stuff like that. You can argue now, like all mainstream hip hop right now is more or less like alternative hip hop, and so I think that helps this album just age even better. So yeah, I don't know anybody. If you were a '90s kid or into hip hop at all, I think you might be hard pressed to not acknowledge this as like a classic. But I'm interested to hear your answers.
Yeah, like for me, like what makes music important, especially when it comes to like older music, which at this point this is like over 20 years old. It's older music, or 25 years old. But it's what it influences in the future. Like the Rolling Stones or the Beatles would have never been important if it didn't breed, the 70s rock that led, and then that led to the 80s and whatnot. And like I was saying, like hearing all these artists mention the Fugees or Lauryn Hill specifically as influences, it's pretty much everyone. It isn't like, oh, just hip hop or just the R&B. It's like you got rock acts. You have people like St. Vincent mentioning her. You get like Pink, a pop star, mentioning her. You have, just a whole bunch of people. So it's and for me, I know when I was discovering older bands, it was always through the bands I liked. Whenever they had mentioned who influenced them, I wanted to go back and listen to it to see like what are the cornerstones of what led to the music I like, because usually I'll like that too, because why wouldn't I?
Right.
Always made sense to me. So as long as these big artists today keep mentioning the Fugees and Lauryn Hill, I feel like this will always have a place in history and will always remain important. And for a genre like rap that was fairly still kind of finding its voice, especially in the 90s, where like what Gordon, you were saying, how everything is almost alternative rap now. It's kind of important in that way. So I think it's like kind of a no-brainer that it's kind of essential as like a building block, not just for females in hip hop and R&B, but also just rap as a whole, as a genre moving forward and still developing and finding new ways to interpret it.
Yeah, for sure. I also agree it's essential. Obviously it spawned so much stuff. And had a huge influence on a lot of people. But I'm going to push back on something Gordon said. You said it's aged really well. And I will say that any of these musics that are dependent, the sound's really dependent on electronics, has a hard time aging in the era where electronics are developing like exponentially. So when you hear this album, like a lot of the drum samples are the same throughout the whole album, and they have a very particular 90s feel to, like the whole album feels very much 90s. So if you meant to be like, does it age? Like, can you put it on now and it feels like it came out today or something? In that sense, I would say it has not aged very well because it's got that stamp of the 90s on it. That's the only point I wanted to make about that.
You can say it has that stamp of the 90s, but it's just boom. Like it's mainly just like sort of the boom bap sort of sound. Like you can still find new hip hop that still sounds very reminiscent of this.
Yeah, this is true.
It's just like its own subgenre. It's like saying post-punk sounds dated because it sounds 80s. Well, no, there's still new bands that still make post-punk. It's just it was popular at that time, where it doesn't really have its moment right now per se. But
yeah,
if you are so inclined that you enjoy this music, I'm sure you could probably hop on Spotify or wherever you listen to music and find so many related artists that are still dropping music today, just because they're not just their influence, just how that whole sound from the 90s was a vibe and was an era which led to a lot of influence in today, which it's good. But I understand it is very 90s. It's just nostalgia.
Yeah, it's the nature of like think about the production on some of the Kanye West songs from last week. You know how much work that would take to make in the 90s? Like, the tech's not there yet, so that really pushes. You could make one of those songs in your bedroom now, and
Yeah, but yeah, technology always gets better, but the old technology never really dies. People still use it.
that's true. But what happens is the new technology opens up new possibilities, so new things become popular, and that's just why the boom bap thing maybe had its time, and it was
No,
stamped in the
like
90s.
honestly, like the most important instrument in hip hop, probably the most important thing that's still used today is the 808. It's been
That's
used
true.
since the 80s.
That's
Never
true.
stopped using. I'm pretty sure 90% of My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy probably has an 808 on it. like that's how much it's used. Like even Q-Tip released an album like 5 years ago where he's literally holding it in front of his head. So like it's still like very much used. And this, I'm not sure if this album uses 808s, but it's very similar. And that's sort of
the term 808 sample, like I'm pretty sure that has grown from what it originally meant, because like
no. It's a literal machine called the Roland 808. It has to be using
has
that.
to be that machine, not
Has
just the
to be
samples
that.
from the sample set. All
Yeah.
right. All
Well,
right.
I'm
Gotta be
sure
legit.
there probably is sample sets, but people really like. I'm pretty sure like big studios will actually have a real one. Or if you're
Pain in the ass. We have one. It's collecting dust in the closet. It's fine. We use the computer, but yeah, we just downloaded it onto the computer.
Yeah.
That's what I would do.
No, I mean, going back to what you're saying, yeah, Ryan, like I totally agree with like in terms of like the production and like what you're getting now is far and away much better. I think where it might find an audience that didn't exist in the 90s. I think where maybe if you hear like a sample or like where it comes from, like, okay, maybe I want to go back and find out what's influencing this influential music that I'm listening to now, like who influenced the influencers more or less in music today. So that's where I think it kind of retroactively ages better in terms of like its production and stuff. Yeah, it's very much a 90s album, and maybe it could be remastered. I don't know.
This is again us coming at it from our own nostalgic like memories of, obviously we're going to feel the association with the 90s because we were growing up then, so maybe younger generations don't hear the 90s so starkly when they put it on. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's
I mean
them.
And you can also think of it like in terms of like
well, a younger generation can't say it's dated and sounds like the 90s if they don't even know what that is.
Well, they could, if they the younger generation can listen to stuff from the 90s and form an opinion
know,
about what the 90s sound like.
You can't, but if you didn't grow up through the 90s, you can't listen to something from the 90s and say that's so 90s because you don't have any sort of.
If
your
opinion is worthless if you weren't growing up then. No,
I'm not saying it's worthless. I'm saying that if you didn't grow up through the 90s, you can't listen to something and say that sounds 90s until you know what the 90s is.
What
So
if you have a PhD in the 90s? Oh.
Never mind.
Yeah, no, I mean, like as a weird example, like for example, like if you watch a movie like a horror film and you're like, oh, this movie's really cool, but then you see like the filmmakers, they're like, I think you kind of mentioned this earlier, Anise, in terms of music, but you hear what they were influenced by. Like, for example, I watched the movie like It Follows. I'm like, oh, this is really crazy. This is cool. And then I go back in time and I watched like Halloween. I don't think Halloween sucks. I understand the influence, but yeah, if I'm looking at it through today's lens, I'm like, this movie's awful. Like it's slow, it's kind of cheesy, but you have to take it for what it was at the time and then see the influence of it. At least that's how I see it.
I don't say music for me at least doesn't work like that. I don't go back listen to old music and be like, oh, this is really shitty, but it's from the 70s, so it's fine. It has to still be good.
No, I'm not saying like, well, if you were to look at it through that narrow context, I personally wouldn't. But like, if you were like, some people might like, if you play, depends how much experience or how much exposure, like what their frame of reference is. Like, if that's the first thing somebody sees from like or listens to from the 90s, they might be like, this sounds like crap. But it's like when you listen to other stuff that came out in the 90s for a better frame of reference, then it makes sense.
What I'm saying is, you guys are looking at this wrong. If you play this for someone who's only 15 years old, they're not going to say it sounds like the 90s. They have no reference to what the 90s is.
But they might not say it's good either, right?
Well, that's up to interpretation. But like, it's just their songs with beats. You can say I don't like it, or I don't like the sound of it, or my taste is a little different. But I wouldn't say how this song was constructed and made is really that sort of like, wow, this sounds so old because it's realistically it's still electronic beats probably manipulated on a computer. So like it hasn't really changed that much. It isn't like going back and listening to like the old cut up samples from an 80s or 70s hip hop song where it's like this is clearly older, they don't have the technology. When you're at this point, it isn't that far removed from what we're getting today. Yeah, to you can be like, well, it sounds so much simplistic in the production, but I can play you 100 songs that are simplistic in production that were made yesterday. So you can't use that as a bearing for it to be old. I'm just saying what I was trying to say earlier is if someone's 15, they can like it or not like it. They're not going to say it sounds old. Only an old person like us will say it sounds old.
Yeah, well, it's hard because I mean, I associate the 80s with that snare drum sound, and I just know that snare drum sound comes from the 80s. It would take a lot of listening for a younger kid. You'd have to be a 90s nerd, a 15-year-old 90s nerd to be able to pick that out. Because I think what we're talking about here is there's subtle production details, just the way the reverbs mix with the vocals, these little production details that you don't they're hard to write down, but you like, you know, absorb them from listening to a bunch of music in the 90s. So we can make that association. But unless you do that listening, like how else are you going to know? It's not obviously 90s.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. It's like it'd be interesting like that get an actual response from someone younger rather than like they're not going to tell you it's dated because they don't know what that means because they don't have any reference to call it dated. They're either going to say I like it or I don't like it. They don't know if it's new or old. It's just a song.
Yeah. Well, all you 15-year-olds who are listening to this live, just like post it in the chat or in the comments. Like, what do you think about this album? 90s?
Yeah, I mean, for me, my
how would a 20-year-old be 290? Doesn't make sense. I didn't start saying that down to 80s until I was a little older and knew what the 80s was.
I immediately was like, oh, that snare drums from the 80s. Immediately. No. Anyway.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you could take it like, you could say kids today don't even know what drums sound like. They're used to hearing like a drum machine with synthesizers, not actual like samples from actual instruments.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah. But yeah, no, interesting combo. Did you guys have any final thoughts before we, I guess, wrap it up?
It's essential. 3 out of 3. All right.
3 out of 3. Yeah, that was a good one. All right, so yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. If you're watching on YouTube, appreciate following along. And if you listen to us through your podcast, you know where to find us on the Essential Albums podcast on Spotify or Anchor or wherever you find your podcasts. What album are we doing next week?
I was just double check. I think I know, but I was just going to double check.
Yeah, while you're looking that up, I'll say original music by Ryan Dugal and artwork by Vincent Tran.
And
by the way, Vince, you did a great job with this thumbnail. I know. Great. Fantastic. Throw that out there.
And next week, we're talking about Back to Black by Amy Winehouse.
Oh, I love that album. All right.
I'm looking forward to it. All right, well, I'll see you guys next week.
Peace out.